Today's episode of Voiced is from r/petty revenge and is about a user who turned the tables on an ex trying to jail them during a divorce. What happened next? Subscribe if you enjoy.
My ex lied during the divorce to have me jailed, and instead he was left with remorse. Came across this subreddit today and thought I had the perfect story to add. I was getting divorced in the early 1990s. My ex was angry that I was divorcing him. I owned the house prior to the marriage, so he moved out, but he broke back in and tore up all kinds of things. He tore up my jewelry, my clothes, he cut holes in all of them, etc. I couldn't prove it, but of course it was him. When we went to divorce court, he gave the judge a 2-page list of things that he supposedly brought to the house with him prior to marriage that I refused to return. My attorney showed me the list, and it was stuff that he never owned in the first place. He totally wanted me thrown in jail for contempt of court. My alternative ways to pay were like $2,000, and I wasn't about to do that. I opted for jail, but my friends kept telling me just to pay it. I refused. 2 days before I was to appear in court, a girlfriend of mine asked if she could see the list. Sure, she noted that things he said were there didn't give much, if any, description. For example, he says there's a gun. He didn't say what kind of gun. He said there was a computer, and he didn't say what kind of computer, and so on. Her point was that if I went around and bought everything on the list, it would probably cost me about $200. And that was worth staying out of jail. I agreed, knowing it would also be worth him being angry that his plan didn't work. So I made a game of it. I went around to pawn shops and resale stores, and I told whoever was in charge there that I was on a scavenger hunt, and I briefly explained what was going on. They all loved the idea and helped me get through my list rather quickly. Here are some lovely examples of what was boxed up for him. Gun, an old rusty cap gun. Screwdriver set, same old and rusty. Clothing, Goodwill hoard stuff. Bust statue, made one myself from clay. Knives, old and rusty. Camping gear, an old pan, matches, and a tiny tarp. And one of my favorites that I remember was he said he had a Monopoly game. So I sent him a Goodwill find without any of the pieces, just the board. I wish I could remember everything that we got. It was so much fun, and when we got home, we had to videotape boxing them all up and going through the items one by one. My attorney told the judge that I had found at the attic, and I just hadn't seen it before. I am sorry. The judge told my attorney to simply drop the box off at his attorney's office, and that the divorce was final. My only regret is not being able to see his face when he opened up that box of garbage. And there was nothing he could say because he had made the stuff up in the first place. It's been 30 years, and I still get joy thinking about it. Wow, I have never posted on Reddit. It's usually just a reader. Thanks for the love. I just found the r/petty revenge subreddit and pretty much immediately thought about my experience. So to clear up some questions, yes, this is 100% legitimate. I am a grandmother. Back in the 90s, things were much different than today. There were few cell phones, bag phones, or big brick satellite phones. Computers were still family computers. This happened in Williamson County, Texas. Feel free to look it up and read about the history of the Big Old Boys Club and how they treated women. Still to this day, if you're caught with even a marijuana cigarette in that county, you're going to go to jail. The list that I received was a handwritten list from my ex-husband. There were no serial numbers, no identifying marks, and no ages. There was absolutely no description. That alone is what gave my friend the idea. And yes, if a judge tells you to do something and signs an order for you to do it, and you fail to do it, that is considered contempt of court. I think a lot of people are thinking of contempt of court as doing something to annoy the judge in the court, and that's not the only way you can be found in contempt. The judge ordered me to either come up with the money, the items, or go to jail for contempt. The judge didn't come up the $2,000 amount. My ex did. Everything, the house, the contents, absolutely everything had been mine before we got together. He wanted to get out of it with something, so he came up with this scheme because he thought I would have to come up with the money since he knew the items didn't exist. Not only was $2,000 a lot of money back then, that I did not have it. Even if I did, I wasn't going to pay it. I was young, petty, and extremely stubborn. Back then, desktops were still very expensive. So that and an arbitrary gun along with the other items would likely have been around that amount if they existed. I got the biggest kick out of a comment from a purported attorney in Texas who stated that this would not be considered contempt, and the one where he had heard this story before, and it's a joke. Nope, no joke, except for the fact that I got the best petty revenge ever, and I can most definitely laugh about it. I wonder if I could get a copy of the file?
Wow, talk about a creative way to turn the tables on someone. That story really shows how one person's petty actions can lead to some serious consequences. Now, let's switch gears to another tale of unexpected revenge. This time, it involves a car accident and a neighbor who just couldn't stay out of trouble.
Hippity hoppity, you damaged my property. Bippity boppity, I'm calling the police. Bippity boppity boo, they're taking your kids too. I apologize in advance for the length. This happened shortly after college. My mom is a retired disabled woman who now owns her house on a quiet residential cul-de-sac. She has lived there longer than anyone else. Her neighborhood has designated parking spaces at the end of the cul-de-sac, all with the addresses of each house painted in the parking space. My mother doesn't get out much, so I use her designated parking space. At the time, we lived in the same city, and I visited her weekly to bring groceries, fix broken things, cook for her, etc. My mom parked her car in the backyard of her house since she went out so little. Mom kept busy by gardening or baking/buying cookies for the children on the street. Mom's neighbor, Ivy, never parked well. Whenever I stopped by, her car was always parked so close to my car that I had to park on the curb. I wouldn't have cared about Ivy's poor parking but for two things. One, she had 4 or 5 kids and had parties almost every weekend, leaving trash in Mom's yard. 2, I loved my car, a 2016 metallic ice blue Dodge Challenger Hellcat, the first car I had ever purchased brand new. I washed that car once a week, detailed the interior, and had rules against eating, drinking, or even leaving trash in my car. It was my pride and joy. Mom had called the police throughout Ivy's residence because of the parties. Ivy's guests would fill up the cul-de-sac with their cars, obstructing traffic, and get into loud, drunk fights at and after midnight. I often found empty beer bottles, empty condom wrappers, cigarette butts, and empty crack baggies on the fence between the properties, mostly on Ivy's side of the fence. This is all important information. One Saturday, while having dinner at Mom's house, I heard a loud crash and my car alarm went off. I ran outside to see Ivy's older model Honda Accord back out of her parking space and speed down the street. Ivy's Accord had a dent from the front bumper to the door, and the headlight had popped out. I approached my Challenger with trepidation and screamed in anguish at what I saw. My car, my beautiful 3-week-old car with less than 500 miles on it, had a dent stretching from the passenger's door to the front bumper, and the right front wheel was tilted at a 30-degree angle. I was livid and in anguish as I called the police, filed an online claim with my insurance, and arranged for a tow truck to take my damaged car to the dealership. The estimated cost of repairs came out to $3,400 USD. Total cost of repairs was eventually $6,500 USD. I had a low insurance deductible, $100 USD, but my car was parked and Ivy owed for the damages. For 2 weeks, I knocked on Ivy's door or waited for her to come home. She stopped driving her damaged Accord and either rented or borrowed a Ford Fusion. When she was home, she didn't answer the door. When she wasn't, she stayed away until my rental car, a Dodge Charger, left Mom's parking space. I left a note on Ivy's door for her to call me, but only received harassing calls from restricted phone numbers or people blaring air horns in my ear when I answered. About 2 weeks after the accident, Ivy's children came to Mom's house for some cookies. I noticed that 2 of them had bruises around their eyes. If Ivy hadn't hit my car, I still would have done what I did, but maybe not as underhandedly. I had Mom take pictures with and of the children, but waited until the next party to strike. Ivy had a party that night or the night after. Mom called me to let me know, and I installed an app onto my phone that gave me a fake phone number. I called 911 and reported the party. There's a loud party at 1007 Mountain Drive, and I'm worried because the children are around all these drunk adults. Please hurry. Mom called to let me know the police had arrived. I drove to her house, stopping by the grocery store first, so that appeared to be the reason, and saw Ivy and her boyfriend Bane already sitting in the back of a squad car. From a news broadcast that night, I found out that Bane had warrants out for his arrest. Initially, the charges were disorderly conduct and disturbing the peace. However, Mom turned over the photos of the children anonymously, mailing them through the post office with Ivy's address and name as the return address. Less than a week later, Ivy and Bane were charged with child abuse charges. I think Bane was charged with more severe charges as well for abusing Ivy's daughter. Either way, the children ended up in foster care and Ivy and Bane ended up in prison. My car was hit by such an awful woman. She had no excuses.
Before I talk about today's posts, please consider subscribing to the channel for more engaging content like this. Wow, what a roller coaster of emotions. First off, that ex really tried to pull a fast one with his fake list of items, but kudos to you for turning it into a petty revenge masterpiece. I mean, sending him a box full of junk like an old rusty cap gun and a Monopoly game without the pieces? Genius. And that neighbor Ivy, who thought she could just hit your car and get away with it? Not on your watch. Calling the cops and getting her kids to safety was a bold move. I can only imagine how satisfying it must have been to see justice served in both these stories. I'd love to hear from you all. What's the best petty revenge story you've ever heard or experienced? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to like and share this video if you enjoyed it. Until next time, thank you for listening to today's episode of Voiced. If you enjoyed daily high-quality stories, please like and subscribe to show your support.